Hey, you guys, my name is Christy and I work on the sales team here at Marriage Helper. My role here is to guide people to the best resources to help them improve their marriages. Dr. Beam and Kimberly Holmes have asked me to read a question that was submitted by one of our listeners for today's episode. This person asks, is there any way to help him forgive me after having an affair over 6 years ago? I had an affair and we went to one of your intensive weekends. We decided to stay together, but after 6 years, he filed for divorce and told me he just couldn't forgive me. What should I do?
As we all recognize, it is the person who's been hurt that gets to choose whether they forgive or not. At the same time, when you have a husband that you have been back together for 6 years trying to put things together, and he says to you, I just can't forgive you, then we would start thinking, okay, maybe, just maybe, there's something deeper going on here inside of him. Because you would think that within a 6-year period, surely we could have gotten past it. We'll be okay now. We can be closer. We can grow beyond like people do when they get past a major catastrophe. And if that hasn't happened, then there's got to be a reason it hasn't happened. Now, I'm not trying to make a counselor or therapist out of you because I can't, number one. And if you try to be on your own, you're probably going to mess things up. So be careful here of not trying to do something you're not capable of doing. But you can ask questions like this. Okay, I understand that you want out. Can you help me understand what it is that you continue to feel? Can you help me understand how intense that emotion is? Because there's a great possibility here. Now, I don't know. I'm just giving you a possibility that what's going on here is that he has never grieved properly. In other words, if you do grieve, Kimberly, I have read, and I'm not sure this is right. You're the psychologist. I'm the marriage guy. But I have read that if a person works on grieving, in other words, you don't just wallow in the pain, but if a person actually tries to get better, that if it takes longer than a year and a half, you're probably going to need some kind of professional help. And so if my mom dies and a year and a half later, I'm still in the throes of distress by that.
Deep grief. That's what it's called, deep grief.
Deep grief. Mm-hmm. And so deep grief is grief that's not going to get better by itself. It's going to take some kind of a process to help me deal with it. Am I right about that?
I have not heard the time frame, but I would agree with that in principle. Yes. Deep grief, you physically, psychologically, physiologically, you can't live in deep grief. Mm-hmm. So if someone is still stuck there 18 months later and they're not making any movement out, they need help.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, again, we don't know the whole story here, but the fact that he stayed there 6 years
That's a lot, yeah.
and still feels that kind of pain, does that sound as if that might be deep grief?
It could be. It could be. It also could be so if we take the definition of grief that our friends David and Debbie Matthews hold to, which I like, is that grief is a loss of expectation. So I thought life was going to be this way and it was not. Whether that was a loss of a person, of your expectation of marriage in this situation. And so therefore, if he has not had time to process that loss and therefore see the possibility of a new future, then he could definitely be stuck there and also holding on to resentment.
Okay. When you say have not had time, it appears with 6 years he would have had time, then that would imply to me that he didn't know how to process it.
Right. So if you take that same premise of that we know from the marriage research that people typically wait 6 years after a problem starts before they get help for it. It's like that here, except with a loss of expectation, a loss of what his marriage would be. The problem started 6 years ago, but if he hasn't dealt with it in the right ways, then it's not getting better, it's getting worse. Mm-hmm. That's what's happening.
Which means, based on our experience, that in all likelihood, I'm not saying this is 100% going to happen, but in all likelihood, that if he does divorce her and marries another woman or stays single, either way, he's still going to have the grief.
For sure.
Because the grief won't be better by changing locations.
Right. But I don't think it's just, we don't know because it's not said here. But I think it's not just grief, it's anger, it's resentment. It's those are the negative emotions welling inside of him, where he's finally looking at her and saying, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is not going to change going to a new person. He's going to carry that into the next relationship and not trust.
In all likelihood, that's correct. Yes.
Or just not enter into a next relationship because he doesn't trust. And he's still going to deal with that, how that's going to affect him as an individual, which isn't healthy.
Right. Mm-hmm. Now, if she's watching this program, and I hope she is, she's thinking, well, yeah, but you're not answering my question. I understand what you're saying. I get it. But I want to do something to help him get past this. Mm-hmm. So what do I do? Now, it may be too late. Because if he doesn't give you opportunity and he's divorcing you, may not have opportunity to do this right now. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you can help a person through the grieving process. Now, this is going to sound counterintuitive, but sometimes the way you help another person through the grieving process is when you let them tell you what they feel. Meaning, okay, let's talk about the hurt that you have. And if he in that does something that you won't like, which will be, you did this, you hurt me, you'll naturally want to become defensive if that happens, because that's what humans do. But if you're able to listen to that, to understand that, to hear that, and to empathize with him, not justifying what you did, not explaining what you did, but saying, you're right, I see how you feel that way, that kind of pain, then you can actually help him start into the grieving process so he can start dealing with all these other things. Now, it may be that he needs professional help to do that. Mm-hmm. And so if you have any influence left with him, if you'll listen to it all, we want to recommend a resource of a company that allies with ours. Want to tell them about that?
Sure. Spark of Life. It is run by our friends that I just spoke about, David and Debbie Matthews, and they do retreats as well as have some other resources for people who are experiencing grief. And they have a lot of couples, or a lot of people, I should say, that have experienced the loss of marriage or the loss of the expectation of what they thought their marriage was going to be, that come from Marriage Helper and to them. And it's a beautiful it's a beautiful next step to help people who are really struggling with overcoming that grief process. So we highly recommend it. We trust them, and they do good work.
You can find them at Spark of Life. That's SparkofLife, sparkoflife.org. Mm-hmm. And you can find them there and find out what kind of resources they have. Now, I realize you might be thinking, he's not going to listen to me, and he may not. But if you have any influence with him, here's the way I would recommend that you approach this. Don't approach it in terms of, well, this is the last step that might save our marriage, because it appears from what you're writing here, he's made up his mind, he doesn't want to be there. Therefore, don't propose anything that sounds as if you're trying not to understand the fact that he wants out. Instead, it could be something like this. I hate the fact that this still bothers you as much as it does 6 years later. I have heard of these people. They're very good people. They do a great job. They're recommended by the folks at Marriage Helper. We already know them. And so would you be willing to look at their website? Would you be willing to call and talk to one of them and consider the possibility of going to one of their intensive workshops? He probably won't want you to go with him, and that'll be okay. Mm-hmm. He can go by himself. The way that they work it, it'll do just as well if he goes by himself. But the fact that he's still 6 years into this indicates that there's something inside of him that still needs to heal, but you can't make it heal. You can just try to listen, try to understand, try to encourage him to find this other thing. But he continues to have, in his mind, a very negative picture of you. So that's why it is so crucial that you consistently live as the new you, if you'll let me use that phrase, the person that you've become because now that you have learned better. And when I say consistently, understand that nobody will do that perfectly, and you won't either. But try your best to be that new person in all things. And even if you wind up divorced, it does not necessarily mean this is over. If you continue to demonstrate that you are the new you. So stop beating yourself up if you are. Remember, don't program him or you anymore to think of you in negative ways. And then be that best you can be through all the principles you've learned from us and life itself. and encourage, if you will, to go to the Spark of Life.